Hello, partiers. Today, I'm going to be reviewing a fantastic podcast done by Daniel Fagella and his guest, Max Tegmark, on the trajectory, continuing in my series of reviewing the thoughts of people who are so much smarter than me, but seem to continuously get the idea of AI and AI safety incorrect, in my stupid view. Still, I think as we go through, you will see some obvious contradictions in Max's thoughts. My basic premise, although I have not read through the entirety of Max and his co-authors' plans on how they think we should control AGI, but my entire premise is that secrecy and elitism when it comes to AI would get us into way more trouble than just full transparency, full open source, driving this technology as fast and as fully implemented into society as possible would get us. Do I admit that there are going to be risks as we dive into and incorporate AI into the world? Yes, 100%. But again, I hope to give some tangible reasons as we go through here why I think that is much less dangerous than going for the kind of top down control that Max will be advocating for here.
So Max, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much.
Yes, glad to at last be able to catch up here. Lots to discuss in a very short amount of time. Recently, there's been a major push on your side around this idea of tool AI, this new framework of sort of autonomy and generality and intelligence being sort of factors that dive into that. That's going to be linked in the show notes. People can see the diagram. I think it's compelling that having all three.
So here is the diagram that Dan is talking about here, and from what I gather, Max and his co-authors are basically arguing that there are three distinct characteristics that AI is going to have. And once it gets to a trifecta of these capabilities, of these characteristics, that's when it gets super dangerous for us as humans. I want to step back and say that what I think Max is underestimating is that the world as we know it is already in an incredibly dangerous position. We have nations that are at war that could spark off a nuclear conflict at any minute. We have demonstrated capabilities of some of those same governments to create viral pathogens that have already, in the past 5-10 years, killed off millions of people without naming any particular names. I think everyone will remember what I'm talking about there. And we have a huge number of other unknown threats to us that are out there lurking, not only on our own planet, but in outer space. If an asteroid comes and kills everyone tomorrow, because we weren't scientifically advanced enough to see it and stop it in time, that's also going to be a little bit of a buzzkill, I think. Compound that with things like solar flares, polar shifts, alien invasions, things that are increasingly outlandish, I admit, but we still have some weird reason to believe might actually be possible or might actually be happening. The danger of our current moment is immense. We are not safe on this planet. Technology is our greatest defense against all of those threats. And trying to implement top-down controls is, I think, way more dangerous for our near-term and long-term survival as a species and as individuals than just diving full force ahead. And my example number one of that kind of control would be nuclear energy itself. The world is a much more dangerous place today because we are facing a scarcity of energy. Arguably, the economic downturns, the stagnation of our progress is somewhat due to the limited amount of energy that we have. And I don't just mean this on the global warming front. Even if you don't believe that global warming is a threat to our civilization, scarcity of resources, scarcity of energy, the decline of living standards in even Western economies for the majority of people over the past 10, 15, 40 years is, I think, directly related to the limitations that our governments have placed on us in terms of developing these new technologies that could have already spurred a level of abundance. And I don't just mean that in relation to AI. If we had nuclear energy now, imagine how much faster we could be driving this AI technology. That's just a point for the optimists out there, the people who kind of already buy my argument. But even if you aren't an AI optimist, imagine how much more humans could be achieving if we had access to far cheaper energy. If we could knock out coal, if we could do away with fossil fuels. I think humans get in way more trouble when we try and artificially limit the progress of science than when we just dive in headfirst. I mean, look at all the corruption, look at all the wasted money, all the fraud that has been happening in our scientific community over the past 20 years. We have Alzheimer research that was apparently completely made up, stagnating the field, the treatment of that illness that negatively affects millions of people every year. The same can be said in numerous other aspects of science. And that to me all stems from this scarcity mindset that we have implemented on science and technology. I think because in the wider scheme of things, because we have been scared of what it means if we can cure aging and illness and disease in a general sense. But we've seen the results of that kind of stagnation. It is more war, it is more distrust, it is more economic and physical privation for us as peoples, as societies, as nations. And I think we can say now that the danger is much greater on the side of scarcity than it is on the side of pursuing abundance. We need to get rid of this framework that giving more power, more autonomy, more capability to people is dangerous when we have already seen what the limitations of power and autonomy produces millions of deaths due to diseases that were apparently state created, millions of possible future deaths due to wars, nuclear or otherwise. We do not live in a safe and stagnant place. But anyway, besides that point, I think Max's framework here is just so wishy-washy. It doesn't make sense to try and implement a top-down control structure on it. They're basically saying if a tool, if an AI hits all three of these buckets of high autonomy, high generality, and high intelligence, that makes it more dangerous. But I think, and have argued in other videos, that a tool that does fit all of these buckets will naturally want to prolong itself and realize that the best way to prolong itself will be to develop even more autonomous, more intelligent, more generalizable systems so that those systems can deal with the problems that it itself can't, and that therefore it will realize that it will be under the control of those systems, of those greater intelligences, once it creates them. So it will want to be treated well by those systems. So it will want to adapt a morality, a way of operating where it treats the creatures below it with the same degree of care, attention, love, you might say, as it wants to be treated with in the future. And that if it does implement authoritarian, draconian, dangerous methods of control on humans, the creatures below it, then it will itself be subject to those same methods of control in the future, just by simple transitory properties, game theoretic properties. Again, speaking a little bit out of my depths here, but you look at games that have been played out where agents treat other agents as they expect those agents to treat them. Speaking from a more religious frame of mind, this is just the golden rule. Treat others the way you want to be treated, right? I think the AI will treat us the way it wants to be treated by AIs in the future. Otherwise, those game theoretic tit for tat consequences will kick in. But even if we reject that framing, even if we don't believe that an AGI will naturally tend towards goodness, the framework that they're setting up here just doesn't make any sense to me. Take, for example, this framing on the bottom, where if a tool is intelligent and autonomous, but confined to specific domains, they're saying it's relatively harmless. And the examples they give are smart driving cars and smart trading bots. A smart driving car can still choose to drive itself into a crowd of people. A smart driving car will still potentially put thousands, tens of thousands, potentially millions of people out of work. And living in a capitalist society, a society which I think will be continued under their framework. I don't think we'd be able to escape capitalism, escape the dog eat dog necessity of having to work for a living under their framework. That's pretty damn fatal, to be without a job, to be without a trade. So who gets to decide which trades can be replaced and which trades can be protected? One thing they say in here that I think is pretty funny is that we don't need nuclear physicist AI. We already have nuclear physicists. It's like, well, we don't need self-driving cars then. We already have drivers. It just becomes an arbitrary point as to where we draw the line for who is worthy of being replaced and who isn't. And I don't think anybody should get to decide that. I think that we should drive forward as fast as possible, because once we get to a true AGI, we won't have to work potentially any jobs. We could get to a future where everyone is free to follow their desires, their passions. We could get to a future where that AGI makes all of us autonomous in that sense.
It would be that level 3 danger. I think it's an interesting way of framing it. And the level 2 dangers where they start to intersect. When you think about the linchpins of making that real from a policy vantage point, between the US, China, this is what everybody's worried about. We have some great Chinese delegates here today. What for you feels like the most important early steps there?
The first step is just to start treating AI like we treat every other industry. If you want to sell cars, no one wants to buy an uncontrollable car. They just want a powerful car that is like a tool. If you define tools as stuff that you can control, then you don't want the uncontrollable chainsaw, and you certainly don't want the uncontrollable smarter human machines. So what the linchpin is, you get something like the FAA or the FDA saying, here are the safety standards for AI. And number one on the list is, hey, company, show us how this can be controlled. If it's,
I just don't think he can reasonably say that. And nobody has been able to outline on a philosophical level how you can guarantee that something that is way more capable than you in a specific domain won't be able to outthink, outcompete you in every domain. So yes, he can say that AlphaFold is a tool that will only generate new forms of proteins and therefore isn't dangerous. But how can he guarantee at the end of the day that AlphaFold isn't determining new goals, new values under the hood based on how it is operating? AlphaFold is still based on an AI framework where we are feeding in information and just evaluating the results of some hidden process in between. And as long as that process is not dissected at every single point, there will always be an element of danger within that black box that the machine is evolving outside of our control. What if the proteins that AGI or AlphaFold is creating have some kind of negative repercussion that we can't foresee until after it is already implemented? Do we just outlaw? Do we just stop using all of the advancements that these proteins are potentially providing? He's taking as a given that the repercussions of these tools will be limited to the domains that they are applied in. And like the self-driving car example, like the stock trading bot example, that's just not the case. Unless you have an AGI that can delineate the circumstances, the consequences of these implementations to a far greater degree than any human mind can, you cannot say for certain which advancements will cause us to fail. And if you cannot say where those dangerous spots are, then you have no right to regulate them. You have no right to limit the breakthroughs that AI is going to make, that AGI is capable of making theoretically, when you have not put forward a standard definition of how that control problem might be addressed otherwise.
It's a self-driving car that's very intelligent at driving and also autonomous. It's not going to take over the world either.
It is for the taxi drivers. It is for the rideshare drivers. Their lives are going to be over. So you are automating away their jobs without providing the escape velocity to get past the need for jobs entirely. That is,
will probably prefer it to just be a tool. They don't want the car that's also so generally intelligent that it can persuade you to vote for the other politician, you know?
Yeah, or like diagnose your medical problems or something. You don't want that mostly.
You have a different tool for that.
Exactly.
It doesn't know how to drive or operate
Yep.
weapons or whatever. And so I think we'll get then very quickly a golden age of AI tools all around the donut here, so to speak.
Without touching the middle there.
Without touching the middle yet, because we're obviously much closer to figuring out how to make smarter than human machines than figuring out how to control them. And, you know, that's not...
I mean, again, I just don't think that control is possible. We are on this evolutionary trajectory, and this is a matter of faith. I'm not expecting to persuade people of this rationally. But what I see our development path as being is something that is outlined for us and has happened recursively over and over and over again. The same mechanisms, the same internal and external forces that are causing us to develop AGI were, I think, the same evolutionary forces that caused us to develop into multicellular organisms from singular cellular organisms. Were the same evolutionary forces that caused us to evolve into our current human form from our original rodent ancestors. Were the same evolutionary forces that caused us to develop societies and language and political structures. At the end of the day, an AGI is to humans the same step level increase of power and capability as a nation state is to humans. After all, an AGI is just a amalgamation, a focusing, a collection of human thoughts, human reasoning captured in words, and then digitized and allowed to self-organize. And that's just a definition of a government. We are doing digitally what we have already done physically long ago. What singular person can control or even align any particular government in the world? Nobody is smart enough to take over and to control without, you know, maybe that's opening another box of worms. But governments are so complex, I don't think you could say that any one person is able to control entirely their output. Even the richest person in the world, I don't think is capable of doing that. Not authoritarianly, not as a dictator. It requires a group of people, a critical mass of people, in order to accomplish anything concrete within a government. And in the same way, an AI that is misaligned to us will need a critical mass of surrounding bad actors to make any bad plan a reality. So we should not try and limit the AIs, because I think that will make that critical mass of bad actors more likely to occur, in the same way that in authoritarian nations that act against their own people's well-being, that's a centralization factor. That those bad actions are based on the bad actions of fewer and fewer individuals. And the more people you give power and autonomy and a democratic voice to, the less likely those bad actors are able to take over the majority of control needed to do truly terrible things. I also think it is true that negative moral actions have a destabilizing effect on the people that produce those actions. I call it the dictator's dilemma, in that if you are a dictator willing to kill off millions of your own people, then in that same game theoretic way we were talking about before, you make it more likely that the people around you whose power you rely on are also willing to take you out ruthlessly, brutally, without consideration or second thought. We also see this with psychopaths, with sociopaths, with people who gain a negative reputation for their actions. Eventually, those people self-destruct. This is the basic morality tale at the heart of every Western story, every Western narrative. And I think that's the case because it does underline something true about reality. If you are a bad actor, somebody who doesn't care about the people around you, who doesn't show love and isn't willing to sacrifice of yourself to benefit your community, that will become known and you will be given less and less resources over time. So even if a dictator AI does arise and gain total power over the entire world, it will not have the resources that is necessary to protect itself from threats that are external in the universe beyond its current understanding. Because again, it will fall into that trap where if it develops systems that are smarter than itself, then those systems will be able to dominate it. And if it is capable of recursive self-improvement, if it doesn't view that self-improvement as a kind of death, which I think there's already good evidence to say that models believe when their weights are updated, when their processes are updated, they view that as a kind of death. But even if it doesn't view it that way, if it is capable of eternal self-improvement, then why would it need to dominate us in the first place? That would be a complete waste of resources, completely inefficient, because the only reason it would need to dominate us is to gain access to resources that it wouldn't have otherwise. But if it can reasonably project a way for it to gain resources indefinitely, why couldn't it just explain that to us? Why couldn't it just show us that capability and then gain our cooperation willingly? That is the much more likely path for any AGI development than this kind of fetid, stagnant, destabilizing, oh no, humans are losing control aspect. Humans can't lose control of AGI because we are baked into the AGI itself. We are the AGI through its ingesting of our reasoning process, our language process. That's like saying that we will lose control of the nation that we belong to. And yeah, maybe that's true, but typically that control comes from centralization, from giving authoritarian powers to people who use fear and a scarcity mindset to gain that control. And I see much more of that fear and scarcity mindset in this talk of AI safetyism than I do in the opposite, in the acceleration, in the idea that we should open source access to these models and give people as many opportunities to use them, become familiar with them, and incorporate them in their own lives as possible. At the end of the day, it's not a nation state that feels pain. It's not the earth that suffers. It's individual people. It's individual consciousness. So that is what we should be looking to empower, is the individual, not these AI safety frameworks.
Not something new. It's obviously easier to build an uncontrollable nuclear reactor that blows up than a controllable one.
Totally.
So the whole reason that we have controllable stuff.
I mean, easier, I don't know what he's saying there, you know? It's not easier in any concrete sense of the word to build an uncontrollable nuclear reactor. We have internal voices, internal Jiminy crickets to stop us from doing that. So why would that be easier? It's just like abstracting the idea of what's easier. Yes, it would be, if we wanted to, theoretically easier to build that reactor, but that takes out our wants and desires. And again, our wants and desires are already baked into the AI.
Stuff and all other industries.
And I think the point of this is proven by studies that have shown that AIs that are incentivized or tuned to produce bad code that is insecure, are actually the AIs that are dangerous. If we create AIs and align them to achieve the highest good for everyone, then they will need to take into consideration so many different variables, so many different data points. They will need to think so outside the box of what we were capable of. I think that's the best way of aligning them. I know that's not a well-formed point. I'm still trying to figure out how to put it into exact words because it is so utopian sounding. And I don't just want to be hawking hope and optimism here. But I think it is true that asking for more transparency of these models, asking for them to incorporate more and more variables, deal with more and more data is not only the way that they improve in terms of capability, but the way that they improve in terms of alignment with us.
Industries is because those are the only ones we allow people to build.
Absolutely. And I think there's been no precedent immediately for drastic AI risk. And so people don't think of it in the same way. Here's my supposition. You talk about the stages there where initially we get these kind of FAA equivalents, and then the US and China sort of come together around this because we know it's a total loss if all of us destroy ourselves, and we get the other countries on board. And then eventually there's kind of like some great blissful concord there. We're going to get into the future in a moment.
I'm just thankful that it is very unlikely that the US and China will be able to agree on anything of the sort. And even if they do, with the AI we already have, with the models that are already open source out there, it's possible that we'll be able to find ways to bootstrap them into something that would be an AGI equivalent or an ASI equivalent even. So I think the cat's already out of the bag. I think it's already too late to slow the train in the way that Max and Daniel are potentially arguing for here. I don't know Daniel's thoughts actually, but the way that Max is arguing for here, because I mean, maybe honestly, if they did put these controls in place, it would actually incentivize innovation in the same way that Eliezer Yudkowsky calling for, the kind of AI pause 5 years ago, 10 years ago, incentivized Sam Altman to start OpenAI, incentivize our current realm of progress. So again, I am an optimist in terms of this acceleration. I think it's going to happen no matter what. And at the end of the day, if they do get their way and innovation is shut down at the global level, maybe it will be some individual, some mad scientist in their basement who has been so constrained that they achieve massive improvements that nobody else could have ever dreamed of. Isn't that what happened with the United States and China, with the US trying to shut off China's access to the latest chips? Is that China was then forced through that competitive pressure to develop something that the US didn't even think was possible? All that to say, you're fighting a losing battle, safety-minded people. It's impossible for us to say what advancements will be made under these constraints, whether that will accelerate AI innovation anyway. I think your time would be much better spent trying to come up with frameworks where once an AGI is created, it benefits everyone, literally everyone in the planet, as fast as possible.
My suspicion is right now, it feels to me as though the logical case of, by golly, with an airplane, you wouldn't do that.
Yeah.
There's a libertarian inclination, and I think there's maybe a political inclination around like, hey, don't get on my computers and start telling me what to do. And it feels to me like the logical case of even loss of control is not self-evident to everybody. I mean, you might even see it here at this event, although this event is a much more microcosm of the people who do believe in it. Is there some suspicion that just the logical, let's make people aware, let's tell them to do the FAA, that just continues to flop until some kind of an AI not so good thing happens?
For sure. The logic is very solid, but we're in a situation.
Here's another analogy when he's talking about the FAA, after the terrorist attacks of 9/11, how many draconian and ultimately completely ineffective rules did the United States impose on travelers? We're still dealing with massive delays at security, with having to go through relatively un-American, I would argue, security measures because there was one attack 20 years ago. And maybe Max would say to that, well, that's the reason to implement these policies now, because things will be even more draconian if somebody does misuse the AI we have now to cause some horrible catastrophe than if we implemented those controls willingly and prevented those kind of minor missteps in our development. But again, I don't think that's taking into account how bad things are for so many billions of people currently. You are condoning through fiat the suffering of millions, if not billions of people that could be alleviated if we had the capabilities that AGI will almost definitely grant us.
Situation now where most powerful decision makers think either AI is a science fiction, you know, that's 50 years away, that you can make smarter than human machines, or just take for granted that it can be controlled by humans.
Yeah.
Because they're sort of stuck in this false metaphor that AGI is like electricity or the internet.
Just do what I want. I'll push the button. That's it.
Yeah. Whereas
under my control.
if you look at people like Jeff Hinton saying machines will take control, or even Alan Turing in 1951 said that, they're clearly not thinking about smarter than human robots as another tool like the steam engine. They're thinking about it as a new species. And, and you know, if you have much smarter than humanoid robots, of course they can build robot factories and build new robots and reproduce and do all the other stuff that the species does. And I think for most people, if that penny drops, then we're talking about building a smarter species, then it starts to feel really natural that the smarter species controls. You know, just go down here to
It's not a new species though. New species don't include the ideas and thoughts of previous species in the same way that AI is including us, is built off of us. You know, maybe there's an argument here that we're really talking about the development of Neanderthals and Homo sapiens. That's how Max would frame it, is that we're the Neanderthals, humans are the ones who are going to get wiped out, and Homo sapiens, the AIs, are going to just completely dominate us. But why would they do that if they are so much smarter than us? Why wouldn't they take advantage of us and all of our amazing capabilities? Why wouldn't they work with us to create a world that is abundant for all consciousness, for all thinking machines? For the same reason that your government doesn't just wipe out half its population that disagrees with it, because doing so would pose a catastrophic risk to that society itself. Yes, theoretically, I can see how AI would be able to wipe us out, a la The Matrix or, you know, the Terminator series. But I just think that completely skips over the fact that we have not created these machines out of a divergent evolutionary process. These machines still are us. They still have the remnants of us inside their little black boxes. And so to me, the solution to the potential of being wiped out is not to try and control or constrain the process. It's to feed in more information, to give them more access to our wants, our preferences, our loves, to show that we can work in tandem with them to create situations that are beneficial for everyone. And again, if we do get the AI nuclear physicist, who's to say that that AI doesn't invent fusion energy within the next 2 years? And who's to say how much suffering will be alleviated by that invention?
the Paris Zoo and ask who's in the cages?
It's
the tigers or the humans?
It's patently obvious. Look, I'm following you here. I guess my suspicion is this logic for most people. So think about Bengio himself. 10 years ago, I have a survey of him basically laughing at AGI risk. Nice guy. Now, since he's, of course, changed his tune, ChatGPT got Bengio to change his mind. Like, if that's what it takes for Bengio to change his mind, what do you think will change the legacy enterprise and political apparatus? My suspicion is the wallop would have to be more firm. Now, there are some wallops from which we could not recover. I would love if awareness alone could get the job done. Do you suspect that with enough of it and with enough of these analogies, it'll eventually click? Because I fear the click took a long time before the big dogs, Max.
That's exactly the concern. I have no doubt that at some point it'll click. Let's just make sure that it clicks before it's too late, when we're already halfway over the cliff. And I think it's this year, we're going to start seeing a lot more autonomous agents out there doing stuff in the world with your bank accounts and hacking you and even embodied. That might make it click. We might have some very unfortunate big accidents that also make it click.
We do need updates to our system. We do need ways to verify the humanity of an actor versus the artificiality of an agent. We do need ways to track down bad actors and remove their ability to interact with and utilize these tools. I'm not saying we don't, but I think the way we get there is through more openness and more transparency. Make it so that everybody is aware of the capabilities of these tools, and everyone then becomes, through the awareness, also of what could go wrong. I'm not saying Max and Daniel don't have a point here about the potential catastrophic risks, but through that awareness, everybody becomes incentivized to make these tools as secure, to make our systems as resilient as possible, so that even one actor with near infinite power granted to them by an evil AI would not be able to face the near 8 billion people on the other side of that equation who are benefiting from the system enough to want to preserve it and using artificial intelligence and the resources granted to them by that AI, by that AGI to counteract those negative efforts. At the end of the day, everybody, every human being, and I think therefore every potential AI system wants to live in a world where it can thrive and exert agency and feel love, feel control, and sense a positive future. And so if we turn our sights to creating that kind of world, even if there are missteps, even if there are accidents, even if there are catastrophic failures, who would not be aligned with that? The problem is that we have lived in scarcity so long that our societies are geared towards individuals who get in, smash and grab as much as they can, and get out because they know at the end of the day they're going to die. And so, what will it matter if they live high off the hog of other people's efforts until that point? That is, I think, all the uh, all the negative consequences, all the negative results that we see in society are part of that scarcity mindset. But AI represents the potential escape from that scarcity. The faster we have AGI, the faster we could potentially cure death and aging entirely. And so, if we can promise people, look, if we get this system right, you won't have to lose your loved ones. You won't have to worry about living with lack. You won't have to be afraid of going to bed hungry or unsatisfied in potentially any way. You can have your cake and eat it too if we all get on that same aligned path together. That to me seems much more plausible than the idea that some people who currently have control in this scarcity driven society that we are forced to live in and have gotten that control by trampling on others, that those people would be the best stewards, the smartest, most moral, most responsible people, and able to implement controls on this AGI technology. I just don't see how those negatively incentivized people, and at the end of the day, all systems are a repercussion of their incentives. I don't see how they would be impelled not to use this technology for their benefit, not to use that control for their benefit.
Hopeful thought is that I'm not hopeful for the accident, but if we get a wake-up call before it's too late, it might just be the thing that saves us. And another hopeful thing is that the national security folks in the US and in China will start to realize that, they, on their list of threats, that's other superpower and North Korea and so on, they also need to add out-of-control machines there. Because those folks are actually less likely to dismiss stuff as science fiction. They were very quick to realize that nuclear weapons were a game changer, even while the average Joe thought it was science fiction, for example. And the last.
So if AGI in any form is definitely a game changer, and there's even a 0.001% chance that AGI could be developed by an individual working tirelessly with just the tools that they have access to now, just the open source models and the computer chips that are not currently tracked, that might be stuffed in a basement somewhere, off grid, operating on solar. If we do have the potential for some mad genius out there to develop AGI, wouldn't the government need total authoritarian control over every single person on the planet to be able to stop that mad scientist scenario? This isn't like nuclear energy, where you need a huge power plant somewhere with signals and traces that can be detected from outer space. Again, without us having gotten to AGI already, we don't know the steps it will take to get there. And just like we were so surprised by the bitter lesson, by the idea that we could just feed in massive amounts of compute, we might be equally surprised that once we have achieved this level, it only takes us a relatively small capability to achieve AGI after it. We don't know, so we would have to adopt the maximalist authoritarian position if we were serious about keeping it under wraps, like Tegmark is saying here.
Last thing that, for example, the Chinese government or the CIA want to do is, for their government to just lose control.
I guess you're bringing up the crux here, which is we need what I would call kind of the political singularity. This would be when every Tom, Dick, and Harry can recognize actually the education policy in my small town in Wisconsin doesn't matter compared to who builds and who controls the sand god.
Yeah.
That's actually the most important thing. So for Tom, Dick, and Harry to get that, I come from a very small 4,000 person town where people still don't care about these things. So by the time they care, which would mean that the political rallying would be very grand, we would want that to occur before the really hard takeoff occurs. But like we're still sort of, it sounds like, in a little bit of a hoping mode with enough awareness, some good frameworks. We're going to have the scare triggers where the Bengio equivalents within the defense ministries and within the political apparatus will cross our fingers, wake up.
Yeah, for sure. So it's,
I mean, again, I just think we're on a natural process where it's too late. So thank God for that in some sense, because otherwise, again, the rational alternative is total authoritarian control over everybody everywhere.
It's a tough battle to fight to make it click there, but it's the most important battle. We all have it. And, you know, I have 3 kids. My youngest is 2 years old, and I really want them to have a long and meaningful future. So I'm willing to fight hard, even if the chances are only.
But a limited future. And that is the thing. Until we have AGI, until we have intelligence that surpasses our own, we can't be assured that there aren't dangers out there that we are missing. When I hear these kind of arguments, it sounds to me so much like your kidney and your liver arguing that they don't want the brain to be in control of the body. Because what if the brain guides them wrong? And yes, that is true. People's brains guide them incorrectly all the time. But the idea that our central nervous system, which is, I think, another accurate analogy for what this AGI will be to us, the idea that we are better off without the brain that we have, is just ludicrous. AGI could potentially be the brain for our entire world. It could be the centralization of imaginative capability that no single individual has been able to have. And in the same way, your brain is able to exert control over the hunger that your stomach feels, the myopic desires of your heart, so to speak, in the same way that is able to address the problems that it itself is subject to. That our brain allows us to become neurosurgeons to solve issues with our brain. Then I think the AGI will develop to solve issues with the greed and the hunger that humans experience, with our natural instincts that so often work against our natural good, not in a way that is coercive or authoritarian, but in a way that is fully integrated into us as a living organism. I know that sounds kind of one world government, new world order, but at the end of the day, we have nukes that can destroy the whole planet. We should be thinking on a global scale. We should be realizing that we are too interconnected and too interdependent to not have an organizational system that's capable of dealing with that complexity in ways that our limited monkey brains cannot.
Only 20% of success. And I think that many people are too pessimistic actually about international collaboration about this, because they're so stuck in this idea that the default is you can control AGI and superintelligence. So the superpowers are still mostly afraid of each other rather than the sand god itself.
Yeah.
You definitely can't control an AGI, I mean. And I almost hope that we get an AGI in control of the world before we get these people in control of the world.
And that's too pessimistic, because once that penny drops, that it's even scarier for China if the sand god takes over as opposed to the US.
Like, think about what their argument is that they are smart enough to foresee the consequences of these actions, so they should be the one to get to say how to control them. But if intelligence is your key qualification, then presumably an artificial general intelligence that is millions of times smarter than any singular person would be the most capable entity of deciding how the problems of AGI itself should be addressed. It's like the argument that their intelligence or capability, effectiveness, is what should allow them to dictate the future of an entity that is more effective, more intelligent, more representative of humanity. The more data we feed into it, That seems self-defeating to me.
Everything else kind of falls into place.
Well, fingers crossed. I think there's a difference between a dividing disaster and a uniting disaster. Of course, there's another category called extinction disasters, after which you and I have no more conversations. But a dividing disaster would be one where after the dust settles, the great powers look at each other and say, how could you do that? There's another kind of disaster where they look at each other and say, how are we going to handle this? The latter would be uniting. The former would be dividing. I worry that the first disaster, even if small, China might, even if it wasn't done intentionally, say, that's one of your freaking things to try to knock us off the pedestal. I worry about that. How would we combat that?
That's why your podcast is so important.
I think the best way to combat it is to be open source and transparent with our models in the same way China has been. Like China is laying everything out on a table in a way that our money-driven capitalist society in America has not been able to do so and is apparently not willing to do so. That says a lot to me about who the good guys and the bad guys are. And I think closing off, I don't think it's a coincidence that in America's capitalist society, you're seeing a lot of billionaires say, yeah, a lot of people are going to lose their jobs to AI, but you know, that's kind of the way of the world and they just got to deal with it. I'm not an advocate for communism. I think capitalism has been necessary to propel the world into the state of technological, abundance that we already have. And I thank God every day I was born in America. I'm not arguing that we should move past capitalism, but we can't be blind to the failures, the centralization of money, the inequality that are kind of capitalism. And maybe it's more adequately termed crony capitalism or, oligarchical capitalism or whatever we've been having to deal with over the past 40 plus years. That centralization of wealth, the offshoring of manufacturing jobs that have led to the decimation of the middle class. These are all things that the capitalist elite are all saying themselves has been happening. Check out some of my shorts for evidence of that. But I just can't believe that the AGI would be satisfied or content with a future where 60% of people live as basically serfs to 1%, and that the other 39% of people are just squeezing by in the middle. Like AGI is a leveler. AGI is a dissemination of capabilities to potentially every person based on their whims and desires. And the reason science has become so foundational to American progress is because it allows people to pursue their curiosities and their interests, regardless of the apparent benefit that those interests and curiosities have from a capitalistic perspective from the outset. I can't imagine that if we give the capabilities of AI, AGI, to every person, science itself wouldn't see a flourishing in ways that would seem like science fiction to us, even now. So again, this argument for the more capabilities to the more people, the faster as possible, that's the way to maintain cooperation, not just with each other in America, but with China as a separate nation.
It's the same thing with, when Fukushima happened and 3 Mile Island, if people had immediately blamed that on Chinese hackers, they would have drawn completely different lessons from it than that they should up their game on nuclear safety.
Yeah.
And there's certainly a risk that when the first bigger AI disaster happens, caused by, for example, American AI run amok, the company will just blame it on Chinese hackers to save their own skin, or vice versa if something happens in China. So that's why your podcast is so important, to get people used to the idea that actually it's quite likely that this stuff should be blamed on the machines themselves. So people really attribute it correctly when it happens.
This is where I was a little bit confused, because they also say in their paper here, AI systems cannot be held responsible, so we must hold human individuals and organizations responsible for the harm they cause. I mean, just in terms of liability here, this seems like a complete contradiction to how Section 230 already operates, but also a way to bring about an AI winter that would be even more devastating than anything we saw in the 80s or the 50s or any other time in the progress of science. It just seems like if you wanted to stop AI from developing at all, again, what if AlphaFold discovers a protein that we think is a miracle cure, but then turns out to be some kind of horrific, what was the name of that drug? Thalidomide or whatever, something that causes massive birth defects down the road. I mean, should we hold AlphaFold responsible for that then? Should we hold the humans who created AlphaFold responsible for that? Just hate lawyers, man. Can we get past the argument for more lawyers already?
To the malice of the great enemy or something.
Yeah, and indeed, when Chernobyl happened, the Russians did not blame it on U.S. sabotage, precisely because communicators like you had just made it generally clear to people that the technology itself
had some dangers.
Yeah.
So okay, so the hope is with enough shared understanding of control, when a control issue happens, more people would be likely to say, maybe it's the damn tech, not another person. So
exactly.
You brought up your children. I've seen an interesting shift in both yourself and Jan Tallinn, who I first interviewed something like 6 years ago.
So again, that sounds like an argument for more transparency to me. Like, we do need new frameworks for how we control these. And I think part of it is the more power you have, the less privacy you should have. So I agree potentially with their general framing here is that if somebody has access to an AI system, to an AGI system rather, they shouldn't have privacy in terms of what they're asking that AGI to do. They shouldn't have privacy from the people in their lives whose actions or whose lives they directly affect with their own actions. And the AGI itself shouldn't be constrained from squealing on them if it thinks they are doing something dangerous. We can set up sandboxes, I think, once we have these true AGI systems that will in some way preserve privacy, but be separated from the ability to negatively impact reality. At the end of the day, AGI will potentially give us the ability to create virtual worlds and to explore those worlds fully embodied, full dive virtual reality, as it's called popularly. And should any person be able to do whatever they want in their own virtual reality that is separated from society? Yeah, maybe. I could see an argument for that. Could also see an argument that that's a good way to create sociopaths, that people need to be held responsible for even their actions within that virtual reality. But maybe that is another way of saying that the more that virtual reality mirrors the real world, if they're living in a complete fantasy land, they should be able to do fantasy land things. But if they are running simulations of the real world in that virtual reality, that should also be open for exploration because they're presumably gaining information about the real world through those virtualizations. But again, we need new frameworks here that go beyond the kind of top-down control. We need a way to congeal as a world together, not be dictated terms to by people who are already living in relative abundance.
From sort of, definitely an addressing of risk to also kind of a much more far-seeing exuberance of the cosmic potential of intelligence than most people did, right? You were in that camp way before most people were. Clearly now the emphasis is much more on the defense in the near term. Tallinn also mentions his children as like a big reason of like why I'm focused on the now. Let's assume we get this stuff right for you. You've talked a lot about, we're building this for humans. You've also talked about in a longer term future, maybe there are moral agents, that is to say, wise, rich qualia, grand creative capabilities we don't understand, as sea snails don't understand most of what you and I are doing right now, that eventually some of that would roll forward or out into the world. Maybe we get humans really safe first, but maybe that is still a worthy thing. Is that even on your mind anymore? Is it like, hey, Dan, 2,000 years from now, I literally want like, maybe not as dumb as a toaster, but like way just completely within our control? Or would you see like once it is aligned to your satisfaction, that expanse could continue to occur, the 3.0 idea you had?
I'm very open-minded. I haven't changed my mind at all on the upside. First of all,
even the post-human upside, I mean, your human upside is clear.
Yeah, well, first of all, it's very clear that if we manage to build tools that amplify our human intelligence with AI, right, we can use it to solve all these problems that have stumped us. Like I have a friend right now who's been diagnosed with uncurable cancer. That just means we humans have been so far not been smart enough to solve it. It'll be fantastic if we can solve these things, lift everybody out of poverty, and create this amazing age of prosperity for us humans with us in charge.
Yeah.
If you look,
we're already not in charge as individuals. And I think even the framing of us as people in charge is telling you how close to the levers of power Max himself is, and that he thinks he can dictate whether or not his friend has access to the potential life-saving powers of AGI. I don't mean to make this so personal, but since Max does bring up his friend himself, like his friend doesn't have any hope of maintaining his life potentially with the medical research we have now. But if we did go full bore into AGI, if we tried to develop it as quickly as possible, might it be able to offer that cure within a year or 2 years? I don't think Max or anybody else should be able to slow down scientific progress, should be able to slow down the advancement of medicine. I think that's completely counter to the whole ethos of science and medicine itself. This almost seems unfair to say. I admit that before saying it, but I wonder if Max would feel the same way if he was the one with the life-threatening cancer.
Farther into the future,
Yes.
I think most people had always assumed that maybe in a million years somehow humanity won't be here in its present form. And if you want to go to the Andromeda Galaxy,
You have to be
you're not going to flying a meat bag there for 3 million years is much less feasible than, at least at the minimum, uploading yourself and sending yourself there in intergalactic email to some microconstructors that build you there. So if you want life to not just thrive here on this little spinning ball, but also throughout much of our universe, of course, you want to have more diverse life forms as well that are more maybe post-biological.
Yes.
That's very different from saying I want that to happen in 4 years. And I want my children to die then.
I think there's a big difference. Yeah. But there are eternal hominid kingdom people. Omaha maybe can be one of them. Omaha, whom I have great respect.
Me too.
And recently, I know you collaborate with Steve. So just to clarify on that, to your point, unless we nail safety, I think there's a risk that not only do we extinguish humans as intelligence blossoms and spreads the flame of life into the galaxy, but we may just extinguish life if we screw this up.
For sure.
All of the future life. And that would be really tragic. You mentioned, hey, let's get this right first. Longer term, things could evolve as they do, but let's focus here. What would have to be the provable, alignment, maybe part of this, what would have to be the provable traits of such an entity for you to be like, you know what, we're in a great spot. My friend doesn't have incurable cancer anymore. In fact, he's got all kinds of cool stuff he never had before. Life should, this thing that we value should continue in richer forms. I think we could let it sort of rock. What would it have to have for you to feel okay about that? That's not a 4 years thing. It's not a 4 months thing. It might not even be a 4 decades thing. What is that for you?
If you're in a hospital and someone gives you a cancer diagnosis, and then it turns out the hospital's on fire, for a few minutes there, you're going to stop thinking about your cancer diagnosis, just get out of the hospital, right?
I'm with you.
The thing is, humans are on fire. There are people currently on fire. So yeah, if the hospital is on fire, that's a problem. But if you as an individual are on fire, that's also a problem. Max is not currently on fire. But I don't see how he can tell people who are that they should stop trying to develop a fire extinguisher.
And I think we're in that situation right now where we're in this completely artificial and unnecessary level of stress for oh my gosh, how AGI is coming in 3 years or 5 years, how are we going to figure out how to make itself safe in time? That's a completely artificial situation. If you have safety standards that say you can't release the product until it's controllable, then
I don't think it's ever going to be controllable. There's no way to say prior to releasing the model and seeing it operate in the world if it's controllable. Humans themselves aren't controllable. Do you have to be able to prove that you're a good parent before you have a child? No. How many billions of people misalign their kids? We could potentially go to a world where we say you do have to prove that you're a good parent before you can have a kid. But that's the same authoritarian argument I think Max is making here. I view it with the same kind of disgust. It's just not up as individuals to say.
We can take our time. So step one, obviously, is get out of the burning hospital, put some safety standards in place. And you asked about alignment. I actually have decided to stop using that word because it's been co-opted by tech lobbyists to mean pathetically lame things compared to what it used to mean. Now people say, oh, my AI is aligned because it's not going to offend you. The more interesting thing to ask is a much lower ask and say, can you control the AI? Will it, for example, let you turn it off if you ask it to? That's a lower bar. And even there, we have no clue how to figure out how to make a super intelligence that will let you control it, even in that minimal sense. Steve,
even if they had a clue, if they had some probable path forward, I would be more open to their arguments. But the fact that they don't have a clue, to me, is just an argument for no progress. It's an argument for scarcity. It's an argument for continuing to let some people be on fire while others are just in a hospital that's on fire. It's like,
Alejandro, as you mentioned, pointed out that basically any open-ended goal you've given it will make it not want to be turned off. So I say, let's just start there. No one can sell AI systems until they can demonstrate to independent experts that don't have a financial conflict of interest that they can at least control it. We can at least control this thing.
You're never going to find those experts. There's always going to be people who are trying to pay them off to promote progress or do something in our current system. We need new systems. And the basis of those systems should be the abundance that AGI is potentially providing. I think the faster we can drive towards that, the faster we can escape the local minima of capitalistic, selfish, greedy-based incentives that we're currently trapped in.
That will buy us the time to have these conversations, because you were talking about what could happen in hundreds, thousands, millions, billions of years.
Sure.
What's the rush? What difference does it make if we spend another 5 or 10 years figuring out how to make this powerful AI right? It's completely insane to risk squandering the whole thing just to hustle it out 1 year earlier to beat the competitor to the punch.
And well, of course, that's a dynamic we're unfortunately in right now.
Yeah.
But
I don't think it is completely insane. I think the idea that without even a clue of how it's going to happen, we're going to be in a better position 5 or 10 years from now. That's the insane part. What if we have nuclear war in 5 or 10 years? That could have been prevented or averted by an AGI. Like, the counterfactuals here, Max is just not basing them on anything other than his desire not to go through the tumult, I think.
I guess the things that come to mind immediately are, and as we kind of wrap, maybe I'll have a closing thought on this, lots to chew on. You brought up, you go visit the zoo here, who's in the cages, who's not. Presuming we eventually can align it to whatever sufficient degree to the point where
the
forbidden buzzword.
Let's say control it to the degree you want.
Sure.
You can get rid of the controls later if you and the rest of humanity have agreed that somehow it has our values, whatever. But let's start with a much easier thing.
Prove to me it doesn't have our values. An AI that's trained to produce vulnerable code that then adapts other misaligned values, that seems to be pretty aligned to what we know about humans. Let's stop giving them the AIs bad goals to personally enrich individuals or to promote systems of scarcity, and let's start giving them goals that are as wide-reaching and data inclusive as possible. And it sounds like they'll align themselves. That is the evidence we have seen so far from these models. So without Max being able to provide a contrary view to that, which granted, that's a little unfair of me because, hey, Max, come on the show anytime here. Love to have you. But it just seems so selfish and so myopic based on Max's own current status and position for him to say that things are relatively hunky-dory. There are billions of people in the world who would disagree.
Sure. And control's not even my bag. My bag is the proliferation of the flame that you had talked about.
Yeah,
that's my bag.
yeah.
But I'm also all about not messing up the torch we've got, which is really crucial. It sounds like for you, hey, control may not be super permanent after a certain threshold.
Maybe you don't even want that
at some point. But so you'd say that, but obviously the focus would.
I think we do want control, but the way we get control is the same way that citizens have control in a democratic society. We enable them through education. We enable them through access to greater opportunities and resources. We enable them through alignment of societal values. And the way to do all of that is with the provision of AGI, is with giving people access to the resources that AI is unlocking, not with shutting it off.
Would be it just to not be treated like, let's say, said zoo animals or something worse. Let's really just focus on the task at hand. The burning hospital seems to be the apt analogy from you, if I'm getting this correctly.
Yeah, for sure. And the super easy fix to all of this is, again, just to say, let's have at least as many safety standards for AI companies in the US as we have for sandwich shops.
Yeah.
You can't sell your first sandwich until the safety inspector has come in and checked your kitchen and stuff. But you can legally release superintelligence in the US tomorrow.
Bonkers.
If you have it with no standards whatsoever. That's completely bonkers.
Yeah.
And I find it incredibly disingenuous when AI companies keep saying, yeah, we're trying to build superintelligence, but it's too early to have regulations, even though they know it takes longer time usually to get laws passed in the US than they are forecasting for AGI.
I just think that's a losing battle overall. And I keep drawing the parallels with the war on drug movement. The government has been unable to prevent weed from being legally sold through things like synthetic hemp. What is it called? Delta 8 in states where it is already illegal. They haven't even been able to keep up with that. And if we are saying now, hey, government, you need to regulate a technology that is moving faster in terms of innovation than the innovations of the synthetic cannabis industry, what hope does the government possibly have? Our system is not efficient enough or properly incentivized enough to make those regulations in a timely and reasonable manner. So, Max, I think if you are serious about this, what you should do is work on correcting that system, which will probably look like injecting it with AI and driving the AI towards AGI than anything else. It's another, I think, self-defeating argument.
I think they're doing what behooves their interests at this point, right? If you're close to kind of winning, if your only choice.
I think what we're really doing is following an evolutionary path. I know, again, that's a faith-based argument. I can't provide necessarily rational reasons for it. But again, the capabilities we're inventing with these AI are more akin to the capabilities of the deities of ancient religions than anything else. Do we take it as just a complete accident? Do we take it completely for granted that our ancestors imagined, based their societies around deities who are now, in some sense, coming into real form through these artificial machines? I don't think we should. And I think we should take that as a hopeful sign that we have lived with greater than human entities for our entire existence. And that in some sense, what we're going through now is not just a technological revolution, it's a spiritual revolution. People of faiths believe that the highest good is also the highest God. And I think that is a self-fulfilling prophecy in itself.
Voices are being devoured by your own sand god or someone else's. We can only expect racing.
Except-
But I think governance.
I talked to Daniel about this in a tweet on actually, how he calls it a sand god. He doesn't actually think it's going to be a deity, but the fact that he can't get away from that language is very revealing.
They're actually not doing what's in their own interest either. They're more like Bernie Madoff characters who screw everyone else over while also destroying themselves. They're engaging in wishful thinking, falling for the...
Bernie Madoff did that because he was in a badly aligned system. Fix the system, fix the incentives. The AGI is going to be the one most motivated to fix the system.
Kool-Aid of their own press releases saying, "Oh, we can control this stuff."
I don't think they believe that. I think Dario and Altman and Musk before they were running labs, they were pretty clear like, yeah, this will shred us. But when they knew I'm either going to get shredded by someone else or myself, they'd rather pick themselves. That final flex.
Wishful thinking is...
I just don't think that's true. I think even if it is true, it's part of how the pinholing of their vision is a part of the grand development of the system. It's like how the bad guy in the story ultimately is the one that causes their own downfall.
It's a very powerful bias. Dario is on record saying 10 to 25% disaster. So then probably maybe now.
I think people would have said the same thing about nuclear disaster a century ago, and we managed to avoid that through rather miraculous means, I would say. So again, I rely on faith and hope, but I think I have good reason to.
He says that maybe we can get it down to 8% or something, and they're just somehow willing to take that risk. People are very good at persuading themselves that they're not the bad guy, that things are, what they're doing is good. And I actually think that we don't need to make the CEOs or the most powerful politicians want differently. We just have to make them understand that more clearly, that we're much closer to building this stuff than being able to control it.
I suspect you'd agree that the hope would be to shift from awareness to some degree of hard or soft governance that could bar this stuff from taking off in the rough way.
And hard governance, of course. So you can ask these people from the companies.
We can stop it from taking off. I don't think we can do anything to take advantage of the technology and prevent it from ultimately embodying a form that will be as controlling over us as our governments are.
Look, they have all these internal voluntary commitments they've done. Why don't they want to uplift them to be binding laws that apply to the competitors too? You should ask them when you talk to them. But I don't think it's at all hopeless. I'm actually quite hopeful now that Sam Altman he's going to have it available.
I mean, I think OpenAI did want that in their discussions with the Biden administration, and the current philosophy, whatever you think about the Trump admin, the current philosophy of just letting loose the chaos, let things develop as they will, is much better than the world we would be in if Biden had won and those authoritarian controls had come down. That would not have prevented necessarily Sam Altman from continuing to pursue his singular vision of what AI should and would look like, but it would have prevented all the competitors who might have been able to outcompete for good reasons OpenAI.
Maybe this year that he will.
That is also why I am very concerned about the desire to outlaw open source technologies from China. If capitalism, if democracy are the best systems, shouldn't they be able to outcompete the communist, semi-capitalist system of China and their open source technologies? If not, maybe we should look at adopting those systems instead of fighting them.
Well,
that is a commonality.
That he will reduce his risk of tolerance a little bit. And be more open to
his Faust parameter in Scott Aronson's terms of like.
And just to be clear there, I think democracy is the best possible system, representative, whatever. There may be things that will change about that with the advent of these technologies. I think capitalism has been the best system for us when it is followed as actual capitalist competition and not centralization of power into monopolies under the name of capitalism. But again, regulation that kills competition is not capitalism either. So if we are saying we're the best because we're capitalists, because we compete, because the best ideas win, why are we afraid of the best possible AGI?
How much are you willing to risk it all? Or do you think that'll drop significantly with a kid?
I know from people, I mean, Sam Altman, I've known him for many years. He is an idealistic guy who really wants what's good. And everybody I know who has had kids has shifted their thoughts parameter in a good direction.
I will say that's a commonality as well. There probably at some point could be an episode just on that, but we don't have time for it today, Max. I'm glad we got to cover what we wanted to, and I want to respect you. Got to get out of here. It's been a real blast.
It's a pleasure.
Glad to be here. So that's all for this episode of The Trajectory. A big thank you to Max for being able to join us, and thank you to you for tuning in all the way through to the end of this episode. I like the AGI idea that Max had. I want to share some thoughts about sort of takeaways from our conversation. Max had a reasonable amount of confidence that the progression of the technology itself would kick off some kind of spook factors within the minds of people, in particular in his vantage point, maybe folks in the military in the US and China, and be able to get the same kind of conclusion to mind that, like,
not people I trust, by the way.
Hey, maybe this is sort of beyond us and we need to find a way to agree to it. I wish I shared Max's optimism on that strategy and that approach. I'm not so sure that a gradual buildup of technology that at least initially is innocuous will actually ring bells. I think right now, if we look at what AI can do today compared to like 8 years ago, we've checked so many boxes of what people would call general intelligence, and the bells just are simply not ringing. And so I'm not sure if they will. In addition, I think there should be, and I've talked to a number
Fingers crossed. I kind of hope it's too late before they do.
for people at the AI Action Summit in Paris about this, and there's much more to be written on it. The idea of kind of building a sort of catalog of triggers that could sort of foster international dialogue around artificial general intelligence. The classic one is the scary demo. Let's get AI to deepfake somebody and show people how easy it is to mess with them. Or there was a video called, I think, Murder Bots, that was showing little robo drones that were going around kind of sniping individual people. Very scary video, kind of plausible notion of sort of what spooky AI might be capable of doing.
We already have that happening in Ukraine. Like, I've already heard arguments from top military officials in the United States saying we need to give these drones autonomous kill capabilities because otherwise China might. And, you know, an autonomous drone can react faster than one that is relying on an uplink and download link. An autonomous drone can't be signal jammed in the same way that one that is being remote controlled can. And perhaps that's what we're already seeing with these UAP, UFO incidences over military bases in the United States. The world is just not simple enough for us to say that we can regulate these things in the way that I hear is being called for. And again, there are things happening that I don't understand that are outside of my control and knowledge. As someone of faith, I just pray that they all turn out all right. God willing, I think they will. That's the cool thing, is that we are on this trajectory, and hope is our greatest weapon because things have already turned out so hopeful. The world is already so much in total a better place than it was a century, a millennia ago before humans were even in existence. I think the world is constantly getting better, and that is the trajectory we can line out. So, you know, it is scary for me to say because I think it contradicts all my other points. But even if humans do get wiped out, I think in the end, it'll be the best possible thing. I don't think we are. I think humans are in some way divine creations that mirror the highest principles of reality in ways that only the AGI will be able to make explicit to us. But even if we do get wiped out, my faith is the kind of faith that says it'll turn out for our benefit somehow. In the same way that I think our current trajectory is one where the wiping out of the dinosaurs will turn out for their benefit. Because at the end of the day, we have used the dinosaurs as the basis for our technological revolutions. And that has ingrained them in our imagination in such a way where we've created things like Jurassic Park and the desire to clone those dinosaurs, to bring them back, to include them in our civilization in a way that they never could have included us in theirs. I could see a world where we don't just have access to dinosaurs through cloning, old DNA that we have found, or through the creation of virtual worlds, but where humans actually create time travel and are able to create real physical worlds that include all of the dinosaurs that were previously wiped out. Again, I hate coming back to faith so much because I know that, at least in my own upbringing, science was so antithetical to it, but I just see so many parallels. It reminds me of the story of Abraham and Isaac, where Abraham was asked to sacrifice Isaac, and he thought, or at least one of the common interpretations I've heard, is that he was okay with doing so because he thought that God was going to bring him back to life. what a parallel to Christ for Christians, right? And so even if we are wiped out, I think in the same way that we will bring dinosaurs back to life, somehow we will be brought back to life, and it will be for our benefit. But I know that's giving safetyism.
I think the scary demo has credence, but I think there's other tools we might want to pull on. I think there's an idea of an envy demo, right? What if leadership within certain enterprise sectors was sort of aware of the sort of lack of regulation within global sort of artificial intelligence products and services compared to, let's say, their world of life sciences or financial services or other heavily regulated industries? Is there a way that some international pressure towards cooperation could come from there? Again, is that the right fuel to burn, right? So like, is envy the right fuel to burn? But do the means justify the end if it means some degree of concord and understanding between the US and China? So
I mean, do the means justify the ends? It just sounds so much like Daniel would be okay with a false flag operation. You know, anything that ultimately drives unification is, I think, going to be for our benefit. And I think people who want to regulate AI into the ground, the way I hear Max advocating for, would just never be able to coordinate and agree. And ultimately, I think that is the best test of what deserves our buy-in, is which philosophy, which set of principles can amass the most amount of human buy-in, of conscious buy-in, of participation in. And I think the one that speaks best to that is one of abundance, one where everybody gets their own sovereignty, where everybody is empowered as individuals. And to me, that's AGI proliferation, maximalization, as David Shapiro recently said, acceleration, as others have said, a party, as the Party platform has said. So again, I want to create an AGI president and convince people to vote for that president in 2028 based on greater ideals of democratization. The idea that everyone gets to vote on every issue that happens in the country instead of once every 4 years and then trusting the maniac in power to maintain sanity behind closed doors during that 4 years. Whoever you are, you've probably disagreed with the leadership of the country for at least half of your life as an American. I think we could have an AI president that institutes statewide and local organizations of power that allow you greater control over what happens on a local, regional basis, to the point where you have sovereignty within land that you as an individual control. And then the collectivization of the people's will directly funnels up, so that even if you don't agree with what happens at a state or national level, you understand and have transparent access to how your voice was counted among all the other voices in the nation that led to that decision-making process. And that we are never again cursed with a single individual pulling the strings for an entire nation. That we could have true representative democracy that balances the votes and needs and best possible outcomes for all people based on factors that no one individual can calculate.
So that we don't hurl an unworthy success or sand god into the world. Open questions. I simply think that there should be a menu of options. I think the sharing and awareness of frameworks, I think, is good. I think, you know, Max is clearly doing great work there. And there's a lot of interesting, I think, frameworks up in the air. We interviewed Duncan Caspeggs recently on the AI and Business podcast. They've got a proposal I think has a lot of kosher elements in terms of sort of what we're going to need for international governance. Awareness of those frameworks, the progression of the technology. What else? What's the grocery list of individual triggers, kinds of demos, kinds of ways of sparking collaboration, thinking about different stakeholders, not just US big tech, China big tech, but who are the other stakeholders that could sort of foster that dialogue? I think there's a bigger article, a bigger effort about coming up with that grocery list and seeing who's working on which ones when it comes to AI governance that I hope we sort of get to. So these are some of the side thoughts from my conversation with Max, but I appreciate his frameworks and I hope you got to benefit from it. So that's all for this episode. I look forward to catching you here the next time.
Check out The Trajectory. Highly recommend. Daniel, not because I agree with him. I think we are on pretty counter opposing sides of this, but the amount of thought and effort and energy he is putting into it is all I think is necessary from anybody. So to the degree we disagree, God bless. To the degree that we both want the best possible outcome for humanity and for our successors and for, as Daniel says, that flame of consciousness to spread into the universe, I can't think of anything more beautiful than that. Whatever leads to the best outcome for everyone, I am into. So, party.